All right, the Hangout on Air is live. Hi, it's Grae and Laura from Thinkful. We're here today to talk about women in tech. It's become a pretty lively topic of conversation recently, which I think is a good thing. And so we are here with a few people to talk about women in tech. A lot of women who are doing awesome stuff today.
Totally. The official title is Decoding Women in Tech and Thriving in a Brogrammer's World. So let's get started.
Yeah, so I'll just ask folks to introduce themselves. Stephanie, do you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie. I'm currently working as Splash's first product manager. Splash is sort of an event management website and CMS. Really, really fun company. And I landed here after graduating from the Flatiron School back in December. I started here in January, so I've been here about 6 months. And prior to, I guess, diving into tech, I was working in a variety of different non-technical areas. I was a writing instructor at one point, and I was also previously working in the music industry. So yeah, I made a pretty big switch, but I'm very, very happy to be here.
Very cool. Felicia, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Felicia O'Garro. I'm actually one of the co-founders of CodeCrew, and CodeCrew is a community that aims to make computer science education accessible for anyone regardless of their background. I'm also a community engineer and the first New York employee for the Rails hosting platform Ninefold. And as far as me and the way that I got started, I was actually working in the financial services industry for a few years. I did my stint there, but wanted to really do something that I was passionate about. And I came across a few articles about the importance of learning how to code and the lack of female engineers. And I got to a point where I'm like, hey, I'm going to start teaching myself. So I spent some time teaching myself. And within a year, I landed my first full-time position at Ninefold, and in the process, I also co-founded CodeCrew.
Yeah. As a side note, CodeCrew is an awesome organization for anybody here in New York City. I encourage you to check it out. Carolina, why don't you say hi and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carolina Huaranca. I am the National Clubs Director of an organization called Girls Who Code. We're a national nonprofit that is trying to change the face of what technology, the technology sector looks like right now. We're based out in New York, and I've been here probably 12 weeks. In my prior life, I was a Wall Street investment banker, but then transitioned into education technology. So been in this space for about 10 years working as a product manager and in business development.
Yeah, way cool. And Alex, why don't you say hi? But be sure to pull your mute off first, because we can't hear you. There we go.
Hello, I'm Alex Berke. I'm currently a developer in residence at Significance Labs, which is a nonprofit startup. It's operating out of the Blue Ridge Foundation, which is in Brooklyn, New York. And prior to that, I was the hacker in residence at HuffPost Labs. And prior to that, I was a Hack and Y fellow and interned at Thinkful. And prior to that, I majored in mathematics and computer science at Brown.
Yeah, way cool. So I figured we could start off with a question that I think anybody could jump into. And that, I think, is talking about what the biggest barriers are to entrance in the technology field for women who are interested in doing this stuff. So we'll jump right in, and I can direct this to someone in particular, or if anybody has any thoughts about the particular barriers that they've encountered, go ahead and just jump right in and let us know what those are.
Okay, I'm going to put someone on the spot. Felicia, what have you got? CodeCrew days.
Okay, well, as far as one of the biggest barriers I feel like I faced was actually self-confidence. I feel like being in a situation where you're in a male predominantly field, you, as a woman, it's pretty difficult to just say, hey, I got this. I can code. I can be a leader in this industry. And I feel like that was one of the biggest barriers for me. And honestly, I just got to a point where I reached and I was just like, forget this. I'm not going to worry about what anybody has to say. I'm just going to do what I have to do to get where I want to go.
So what inspired you to kind of take that leap from being in the financial services world to kind of going out there and hacking your way into this world?
Honestly, I just wanted to do something that I was passionate about. In the financial services industry, I love what I was doing, but I wanted to actually do something that I really, really enjoyed. And I love creating things. I love meeting people. And tech was just so inspiring. The things that were going on, the innovation, especially here in New York, there was like this big boom going on here in the city. So I really just decided that this is something that I want to get involved with. And like I said, I started with teaching myself how to code.
Yeah. Cool. So, Stephanie, you're also a relatively new person in the tech field.
Just FYI, Stephanie's bio, when I read it, was the coolest thing ever.
Someone random
soul and what was it? Started playing piano at the age of 3.
Wow.
Music management company, and then I talk about how that journey kind of happened, Stephanie. I was just super excited.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, you guys were cutting in and out, so I'm going to make an assumption about what sort of the question was. But I guess my journey. Yeah, I don't know. I think I've always been really
crossed along the way. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was that?
I said more about your journey and kind of like the barriers and hurdles that you encountered along the way and how you overcame them.
Yeah. So obviously my background was heavily like, arts related, music and performing, and initially I thought that's what I was going to do with my life. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a singer or something. But I think I don't know. Felicia sort of nailed it, but you realize that, hey, like I'm a creative person. I love to create, and there's like many different ways to do that. And I think, I don't know, for me it was sort of lack of exposure to very like technical people. Like nobody in my family really did that, and nobody around me really like studied computer science that I was close to. All my friends sort of did the humanities thing as well. So yeah, I don't know. I think just realizing that like, oh, there are other ways to be creative, and then once I really like realized that, hey, programming is a creative thing, I sort of was able to, I don't know, wrap my head around it and embrace it more. And the journey, yeah, I woke up one day, I was like working in music, and I just realized like, hey, all the coolest stuff out there currently is like music related to music tech. At least to me, there was Spotify was just coming out, SoundCloud, Songza, and I was like, maybe there's a way to do music, but also sort of branch it into this very sort of intimidating industry, tech, right? And I realized, all the jobs in tech, like, require you to know how to code. So I also started by, teaching myself on Codecademy and whatnot, and eventually applied to the Flatiron School, and they really helped me take the rest of the way. So.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yep.
So,
I was just going to say, Alex, we'd love to hear.
We're vacillating back and forth between what you use.
Sorry, you keep coming in and out. I couldn't hear you.
We'll get a little closer. It's one of those talks. Leaning in, pun intended. So I was just curious if you could tell us kind of what your experience has been like. You've worked at HuffPo Labs, you interned at Thinkful, and kind of how has the world been for you as far as, have you felt a gender bias in it, and kind of how have you navigated any challenges along the way?
Well, I think I've made a point to put myself in communities where I've completely avoided the gender bias, which can be good and bad. Thinkful was a very open community. Where I went to school was an extremely open community. So even though, and of course, Huffington Post is a pretty liberal organization, and where I work now is a pretty open startup in nonprofit in Brooklyn. But it's still been the case that I've always been the only woman in the room, especially in my classes that were both math and computer science in school and in the places I've worked. But luckily, I've been in situations where people seem excited to have me there, and it's strange being the only woman sometimes, in that people will always remember you. You're one of the only female developers they've ever met, so you'll never be forgotten, and it has both pros and cons.
That's awesome. What about you, Carolina? I'd love to know a little bit more from the lens of somebody who's behind, women who code, and you've got a whole bunch of experience on the ground about how it is targeting those communities in particular, and kind of, I'm sure, more insight on the ground from what people are saying about it.
You can't be what you can't see, right? So I think what I'm hearing from all the speakers right now is that there's an issue of confidence, and that often comes because you may not see someone that looks like you in that position, right? I also think what is important is really identifying pathways to what someone in engineering or in STEM is able to do. Being able to also be in very different communities. When we talk about like all serving all girls, we also need to think about what does that look like in a suburban area? What does that look like in an area that's underserved, that may not have hardware for computers, right? But to change the discussion just a little bit, in terms of my experience, I founded a technology company out in the Bay called Spriggle a few years back. I bought a one-way ticket and I started a company. But the company was focused on target consumers of moms, and 85% of women make purchasing decisions. But when I was going to meet venture capitalists, they were overwhelmingly males. So women that I was selling, I was cash flow positive, making revenue from day one, but it was very difficult to explain the problem that I was trying to solve when I was in front of investors. So I think even those barriers, when you're not seeing women that are making the decisions in investments, because typically the pathway for a venture capitalist is someone that came from a technical field, exited, and then goes on to invest and start their own fund, are challenges we also need to be thinking about.
Yeah. So, Carolina, you're, I think, particularly well suited to answer this question. What can people do who are looking to get into the technical field? Like, what are good first steps for them to take if they're interested in doing something like the stuff that you're involved with?
Well, they need to, like a lot of the women here said, they just need to try, right? I think one of the big things that I always tell people, it's okay to fail, right? Fail fast, but keep failing. So just get exposure to these things. And the population that I serve are young girls, right? So I'm often talking to parents, grandparents, aunties, and what I often tell them is just tell them that your girls will be good at it, right? I think the overall messaging in the media that we have is often we see one type of vision of a guy with a hoodie, maybe downstairs, like hacking away, and that's not something that might be relatable to a young girl. So I think it's even the language that we're using to encourage girls at an early age that this is something that they can be good at.
I think it's also that from an early age, girls learn to be shown how to do something. And when you're learning computer science, it has to, or just coding in general, it has to be very self-directed. You have to have a lot of confidence that you can go out and do it if everyone else is doing it. No one's showing you how to do it, but there's all this documentation online. And a lot of guys, the way they grow up, they have a lot of confidence in just going in and building something, starting something. And even if they don't naturally have that confidence, they put out an air as if they do. So going in as a girl, it's really intimidating, because it seems like everyone else already knows how to do it. But you just have to suck it up and think, like, if they can do it, I can too.
Was that confidence something that you paid deliberate attention to as you were getting interested in this field, or was that something that just came naturally to you?
No, I was really intimidated at first because it seemed like everyone already had a leg up on me. But at a certain point, you had to realize that they were all bullshitting and that you could do that too until you were there.
Yeah, Felicia, has that been your experience that you were able, like once you dived in, you were able to kind of keep up with everybody?
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty much you have to just say, okay, this is something I can definitely do, and just do it. And I come across a number of girls that have the same issue. Well, I don't think I'm smart enough, or I'll never get this, or I don't think I can learn this. And it's just like, just do it. Like, if you fail, you fail. But I think the thing with women is that we want everything to be perfect. And with coding or technology in general, nothing is going to be perfect. You just have to try things out and fail first.
Stephanie, I saw you unmute yourself. I wasn't sure if you were getting ready to jump.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add one more thought, I think it really helps to go into this with like a great friend or to make, you know, good other women friends along the way, just so that you have that like support. Yeah, I mean, I that's a huge part of why I love the Flatiron School so much. It was just that, you know, it was like 12 hours every day, like seeing a set group of people, and you know, a good number of them happened to be women, and I made great friends with them. And while everybody is supportive, you know, there's like a special extra bond, I think, that you can form with like a fellow woman, right? So having like really strong, motivated female friends who are also going through the same thing, I think that just makes it easier to like not, you know, flake out or not give up like along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard some people say that it can be challenging to find a role model as a woman interested in getting into engineering specifically. Kind of, have you been able to find a role model or a mentor outside of the Flatiron School context?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, I wouldn't say that there are, you know, there's like one specific female mentor that I get to interact with every day necessarily, but you know, there are figures, right, where you may not have met them, but like the idea of them certainly inspires you. And you know, one of those women for me is Sandy Metz. You know, she wrote, she's written extensively about Ruby and Ruby on Rails, and just, you know, I really identify also with her because she constantly talks about this feeling of like having the imposter syndrome despite all this success she has. And I think that's just something, I don't know, for me personally, that's never going to go away. It's always going to be like this voice inside my head telling me like, oh, like maybe you shouldn't be here, you know, like when you, I don't know, get stumped on something, like the voices come back, you're like, oh, you know, you weren't cut out for this. So anyway, if she can feel that way, it's like, oh, it's okay that I feel this way. I don't know, Sandy Metz is great.
Wired inherently to kind of think about that in general. What is it? There's some statistics about how when guys are asked, you know, what about their success on a project, they'll take ownership for everything. When you talk to women, they'll basically credit everybody on their team.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to figure out kind of how to break those cultural norms and to take ownership and to be okay with feeling like an imposter, and especially in this space where everyone's kind of figuring it out together.
Yeah, actually my coworker just called me out today for doing that. She's like, look, you totally just like deflected the fact that you like worked on this project, and I'm like, damn it, you know, I can't even, it's so like inherent, I don't know, it's something that I guess like consciously have to try and break, right?
Yeah. What was your experience like, Alex? You said that you met a whole bunch of people that you were working with, and it was a different type of experience because you were immersed and surrounded by other, you know, women in the space. Were there anybody that you particularly got along with? Were there any instructors that you kind of looked up to?
No, it was really lonely.
Yeah. So you just found like the coolest guy in the room and tried to emulate him, or kind of how did you go about it?
No, you just got to be really independent, and it might be really lonely, but you just got to suck it up and do it. I mean, if you love what you're doing, then you can. I really love programming, and I love all the logic that goes into it.
Yeah. Okay, what about you, Carolina? I know that you said something really awesome earlier, which is you can't be what you can't see. And I think that that's, as a minority myself, I kind of know what it's like to have the wrong, you know, we shouldn't all be looking to the Kim Kardashians of the world and making I'd love to kind of hear what your thoughts are on it.
In terms of, can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit.
In terms of kind of finding the female heroes, fostering them within your community that you already have, like do you bring in speakers to inspire people? Are they all in the tech world? Are they not? Kind of how do you spark that fire?
Yeah, so that's actually part of our curriculum when we have our girls who code programming, right, in the clubs and in the summer program. So we make a really concerted effort to have diversity in terms of women who are coming in from different parts of tech, so not just developers, but we also have product managers, entrepreneurs, and we bring in men. And I think that's also been really powerful, that men are also part of this and being real allies to the movement that we are trying to build to serve 1 million girls in 2020. So it's making a very concerted effort to bring in the right mentors, diversity of speakers. So girls are seeing people that even may, they tell, I think what's been really powerful in our program is when people tell their authentic stories, right? They show their authentic self. So if you get up there, you're a developer and you grew up in the housing projects and you've been 3 generations in and you're talking about how you're a hacker, can you imagine how powerful that is to a girl who's sitting out, across the audience and seeing herself in that person? So I think we really, through the support of our partners and the outreach that we've done in many communities, we're building that experience in all of our programming.
Yeah. Felicia, have you been able to find individuals that you've been able to connect with in person to kind of fill that role model or mentorship role, or is that something you've kind of looked elsewhere for?
Actually, yeah, I had the opportunity to, recently I had the opportunity to meet Sarah Allen personally, and which was very, very inspiring to me. I actually organized the November Rails Bridge here in New York City. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Sarah Allen, she's actually the founder of Rails Bridge. And I had the opportunity to meet with her, sit with her, have dinner with her, as well as the Ninefold team, which was really amazing. Honestly, I had nothing to really say to her. I was so nervous just sitting next to her. But it was just an awesome experience because this was an event that I really put a lot of time, energy into, and just to have the opportunity to sit with her and speak to her and see this woman who had created this amazing organization that has introduced so many women to Ruby on Rails. It was just really awesome. And another person that I met was actually Sarah Chips. I haven't really spoken to her as much, but as Stephanie, I'm actually a Flatiron alum too. Shout out to Flatiron School. And Sarah Chips actually heads the Flatiron Labs. And when I first started out coding, I started out with Girl Develop It. Well, I did Code Academy first, but as far as in-person instruction, I was really excited. I came across the Girl Development site, and I'm like, wow, here are all these classes. They're only $99. I'm going to sign up for like all of them. So I was taking like 2 classes at one time. And then like at the end of March, I had the opportunity to meet her when she came in to speak, and that was just like a really cool experience.
So Felicia, we got a great question from Cynthia on the interwebs, speaking to that point.
Okay.
You signed up for a whole bunch of classes. Like, how did you decide what aspect of tech to get into?
I knew I wanted to do something code related. As I mentioned, well, actually, I came across one of the CNN specials, and then I read a few articles about coding. And there's no women, there's no female developers out there. There's no female engineers. So I'm like, hey, I feel like if I could learn to code, there's a lack of coders. If I could learn to code, I can get in anywhere in a technology company, even if I suck at it. At least I'll have some skills where I could take the time and work my way up, build up my skill set. So my first priority when I started out was just to like really focus and learn how to code, or even just expose myself to coding.
What language did you start out with, out of curiosity?
I started out with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So I started with the front end, and then from there I went to Flatiron School to learn more about like the back end databases, as well as go deeper into JavaScript.
Awesome.
So you talked a lot about the challenges that you face in tech. What advice do you have for people in tech, whether they're men or women, that help kind of mitigate that or help improve things that, in the future, those challenges are less?
How can we activate our allies like right over here?
If you are at a tech event and you meet someone that's a minority, like a woman, assume that she is a programmer. It's crazy how many times I'll be at events for programmers and people will assume I'm not a programmer.
I go and
why would I be here?
But you find yourself playing the programmer or not game. Like it's really depressing because I do it myself too, and I'm kind of looking, and a lot of them we're kind of seen as, and I'm part of the problem, frankly. The marketers that kind of go in there and try to become part of this group, and I'm learning how to code, and I'm super excited, but I judge myself a little bit for being that girl who makes everybody assume that I'm a programmer. So I'm sorry, but yeah, no, I agree. I think that we kind of should assume that everybody knows their stuff unless told otherwise.
Yeah.
What about you, Carolina? How can we?
You're still muted.
You're still muted. How can we help Grae help us help ourselves?
Or other people.
Just tell people what you do, right? Don't make it intimidating. I think sometimes when I go to these tech events, some people have a very elitist approach about who can or who can't code, and I think just being able to be honest about that it's not that hard, right? This is something that's accessible. I think that's really important. It's the language that we use, and if someone's interested, pay it forward, right? If someone wants to learn a little bit more about what you do, take the time. For me, anytime someone wants to ask me a question and say that they want to have coffee and learn about what I do, I think that's an honor, right? I'm flattered that someone thought that I had something important to tell them, right? And especially if you're a male and you are a developer and a woman or a minority comes up to you and asking for that guidance, make that time. Pay it back.
Stephanie, what would have made your transition easier in a month?
I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know that any one thing would have made it easier. I guess, I mean, ideally I would have loved to have just spent more time maybe. I would have loved to have had more time to get better at coding and programming before I sort of like thrust myself into the real world. But then again, maybe this is playing back to the whole like women are perfectionists and it's like never good enough, and it's like never a good time to start because like, well, I feel like I'm only 60% of the way there, not 100, and so I don't know. I the only thing I can say is maybe I wish I would have loved to take like a whole other year to just like, I don't know, like keep learning before I dove into the scary real world. But I mean, there's no better sort of way to do this than to just dive in, right? So.
Cool.
Okay, so just one more question, and I know it's a little kind of ironic / controversial. My question is, we're talking about women in tech, and it's super buzzworthy right now, but is even having this conversation, like, is this marginalizing us? Is this something that you feel is empowering if we kind of talk about ourselves as a separate entity? Or is it something that we should just change the conversation to be more inclusive and just assume that we can play with the guys and maybe even beat them type thing?
Go ahead, Alexandra.
Maybe it's hypocritical because I am participating, but I think it's marginalizing. I think if we really want to hold our own, then we should be able to get through just holding our own and not shouting out loud, hey, I want to be recognized as a separate entity, because it points out to the fact that we're a woman.
So how can we go about supporting women without it focusing solely on women? Do you have any kind of thoughts?
I think it's about keeping it open. For example, as I said, like if you see a woman at a tech event, assume that she's a tech, assume that she's a programmer, assume that she's the same level as you are.
Great. Carolina, you want to jump in? I know we...
Yeah, no problem. I have a different opinion. I'm on the other spectrum. As a woman, as a Latina, I'm shouting that out very loud, right? And this is, everyone else has a very different perspective on it. But for me, it is important. Frankly, right now, I think we're in a moment. There are a lot of pipeline groups like Girls Who Code, Black Girls Code, technology companies that have networks dedicated for women in tech. And I think having that collective group means we as a movement can work together collaboratively to push forward an agenda to having more young women have access to role models, access to democratizing what CS education is in underserved communities. So for me, I think it's a very empowering term. Frankly, what a lot of our girls say when they come up to me and they thank us for the program that they went into, they're like, you know what, I'm a girl and I can code, and there's a level of respect that I get for that.
Felicia, do you have the same experience kind of with a similar lens, or is it a different perspective?
I actually have to agree with Carolina. I had an experience a couple of months ago where, well, CodeCrew, we actually had an outreach event in the Bronx. One of our initiatives is iCode New York. So what we do is we go out to the outer boroughs and, well, the other boroughs aside from Manhattan, and what we do is give 2-day workshops where we introduce women as well as men to coding. And we had an event in the Bronx, and I was just really surprised at how many people who weren't aware that of like technology and as far as learning how to code and the different resources that are out there. There were so many people that came up to me just like, oh wow, there's classes on this, there's programs on this. I'm like, there's so much stuff online. But they were so surprised. And we even had a few girls that were actually in some of the, one girl was in Fordham University, another girl was in one of the other universities here in New York, and they weren't actually aware of a lot of the resources out there. So I feel like the more that we have these outreach programs, different events, it definitely builds more awareness, especially in areas where people may not have ever heard of coding or even like some of the opportunities that are out there. Like Carolina said, she's a Latino, I'm an African American. And when I go home, they look at me and ask me, what do I do? I'm like, well, I'm an engineer. They're like, what do you do? I code. What do you do? You know, it's like, it's not really important. So I think it's definitely reaching out to those other areas where people haven't really been exposed to this.
Do you have the same opinion, Stephanie, or is it a little different?
I don't know. I think I hear both sides, and both sides are valid, right? I mean, like constantly bringing attention to the fact that we're women, I agree, in one way can sort of, yeah, highlight maybe something that isn't supposed to be the point, right? But then at the same time, you know, how do we get more exposure out there if we don't sort of, you know, celebrate the fact that we are women? So it's tough. I mean, I see both sides, but ultimately, I think, you know, the benefits of identifying, you know, as women and you know, bringing awareness to it and being conscious of it, I think ultimately, like, the benefits outweigh any, I don't know, potential negative outcomes from that. So
yeah. That's awesome. Well, that's a really good point, I think, to wrap up the conversation. We're at our half hour. We're like a minute past Alex's battery. She said her computer was going to die. we just passed that. But everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and I've had a blast.
Totally. We had so much fun. There are two ferns, which you can't really see. Properly. We'll keep trying. But please continue the discussion using Think Women or on our Google Plus page. We're going to kind of write a little blog post on this up and talking about where we see the future of helping empower women in coding. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.